Hello and welcome to TB Ed Talks, a series from TB Fighters where we sit down with experts in the world of TB and learn all about the things that they are experts on. My name is Tori and I'll be your host tonight, and with me is my co-host and our very special guest. Tonight's talk is called Partnering with People, Compassion, and the End of Tuberculosis, and on that theme, we thought it was appropriate to bring in a co-host from one of our most valued partnerships at TB Fighters. Dr. Kelly Holland is joining us from We Are TB. Dr. Kelly is a family medicine physician in Massachusetts, and spoilers for TB 101 if you haven't seen it, a TB survivor. He's also the reason some of us are considering moving to Massachusetts so that we get to hang out with him more on Hill Day next year. Say hi, Dr. Kelly.
So glad to be here with all of you. And Tori, thank you for that great introduction.
Well, we're huge fans. And then our very special guest tonight is none other than Dr. Jen Furin. Dr. Furin is a drug-resistant TB doctor and a medical anthropologist and has worked on drug-resistant TB since 1996. She has so many jobs that I had to email her and find out which ones to mention here. So we'll say that she is the director of capacity building for the Sentinel Project on pediatric drug-resistant TB. She has also been described by friends as truly one of the greatest forces for good in the TB world, both as a clinician and as an advocate, leading the way in treating drug-resistant TB. And we are so grateful to have her with us here tonight. So with that, I will hand it over to Jen.
Great. Thank you so much, Tori. And thank you, Kelly, for agreeing to share the time with me tonight. And hello to all the TB fighters. I have to say, Tori is always so nice, and all of you are always so nice about your fandom, but I will have to do fangirling of my own and say that the TB fighters, I can't say I'm your number one fan because you have so many, but I'm one of like your top 10 fans. I've been doing tuberculosis work for a really long time. And the energy and spirit and knowledge that you all bring to this space is really unlike anything I've seen. And I'm a salty old TB person. So yeah, it's really just to say thank you to all of you for the work that you do. And whether or not you realize it, your bravery, your diligence, your passion has really changed the landscape of things for us over the last few years. So I get to start by being a fangirl too. But tonight, I really want to talk about what I think is the missing ingredient of why we're having such a hard time ending tuberculosis. You know, I know you've heard from several very prominent and smarter colleagues than I am about what they think we need to do to put an end to tuberculosis. But I think our wisest strategies, our best use of dollars, our newest technologies, they can get us to a certain point. But until we realize that it's partnering with people, and I don't just mean any people, I mean people who are the most heavily impacted by tuberculosis, we're not going to be able to end TB. And so I'm trained as a doctor and we have to have our slides, so forgive me for slides. But I also was told by Tori and other colleagues that this is kind of like the 1 year anniversary since Everything is Tuberculosis came out. And I think, you know, we all are big fans of John Green and his work on TB, as well as on many other things. But it really has been an amazing year of Everything is Tuberculosis. And I remember when I heard that John was writing this book, and several of my colleagues and friends in the TB space had spoken so highly about him. My first thought was, well, why would he do that, right? I mean, my nieces had all read a lot of John's writing, and I thought, you know, what would compel this man, and what kind of a dog's breakfast is he going to make out of, you know, our disease, right? So he reached out and we were in touch, and he said, would you mind looking at it? And I was like, no, that's okay. I was flying to South Africa. I had like 17 and a half hours on a United Airlines flight uninterrupted. So I'm like, oh, surely I can look at this nice man's book. And I couldn't put it down. I was so enthralled by what he was writing and learning things that I didn't know. And so it's a huge shout out to John and really the incredible book that he wrote, both from a scientific but also from a humanistic standpoint. And I think one of the things that is so compelling about Everything is Tuberculosis is that the book really amplifies the lived experience of people who've been diagnosed with and who are being treated for TB. But through that lens and through the story of Henry and his mom, the book really takes us into a human element of TB that's often missing when people think and talk about tuberculosis. But it does so by showing us how so much of the disease is shaped by putting the idea of TB on others, right? It's someone else's problem, and that someone is very different from me, right? Or different from good people. And in parts of the book, I think John talks about how in some periods of time it was romanticized. It was, something that, really thoughtful, creative people got. But the feature to TB that really struck me when I started as a young medical student hearing about and working on TB was that TB is always seen as a problem of someone else. And so by viewing it in that way, by constructing the way we think about the disease in that way, I think we've done a great disservice to global approaches to public health and the medicine of TB. And I'm not talking about just like how we treat people who are diagnosed with TB, but the very way we think about the medicine and solving this. And that I think in order to overcome a lot of the things that we do wrong in TB, we really need to shift power dynamics and actively, genuinely partner with communities that are impacted. And I wanted to share, I mean, this is like the TB Ed Talks are nice because they invite us experts, haha, to talk about what we know. But I mean, I've been doing tuberculosis for a long time. And as proof of that, this is a picture of me with Paul Farmer and a family that shared their permission for me to share this photo that I first encountered when I began working on tuberculosis in Lima, Peru in the mid-1990s. I did not intend to work on tuberculosis. Like many people in the US, I thought this is a disease that nobody gets. In fact, my mother cried when I told her I was a tuberculosis doctor because she said, "You've worked really hard your whole life. It's too bad they assigned you to a disease that nobody gets." And my mom's a really nice lady. And I was like, no, 10 million people get it. But I didn't know that either. I wanted to be an HIV doctor. Sorry, I'm in a hotel and the fire alarm keeps going off. I came of age during the HIV crisis. And I just remember thinking there could be nothing worse than being really sick and having people treat you very badly. Like just your friends wouldn't talk to you, people wouldn't sit by you, they wouldn't go visit you in the room. And I had the great fortune of going to school in Boston with Paul Farmer and Jim Kim. I had gone to UCLA and got my PhD in anthropology because I loved anthropology, and then went to med school and I called them and said, I'm an anthropologist too. And yeah, I started volunteering with them, photocopying articles, and then got brought into this world of drug-resistant TB at a time when I thought global public health is a very noble field, right? It's about doing what you can for diseases and offering services to people. And I was really shocked, probably was naive, to find out that that wasn't necessarily true. That global public health sometimes was about doing the best things for people, but a lot of times it was about coming up with reasons why some people didn't deserve the best possible care. And so it was in the early 1990s, really through working on drug-resistant TB, because that's what we happened to be working on in Peru, that I learned a lot of lessons about global health, and that my desire to be a TB provider was really born. And to this day, I'm so thankful for that. I can't imagine working on another health area, and it's just been 30 years flew by, which is what older middle-aged people say whenever you ask them about time and how it passes. But this was one of the first families I worked with in Peru at a time when they said there wasn't drug-resistant TB in Peru, which there was. It just they didn't have a lab for looking for it because they'd been told they didn't need a lab in the interest of simplicity. And if there was drug-resistant TB in Peru, it was because people who had it did something wrong, right? They didn't take their medicine properly. It wasn't transmitted. It wasn't. And we were running across family after family after family where the whole family had it. And so this was a family where actually 4 of the children had drug-resistant TB. They each had different levels of resistance that were actually based on the drugs the program had given to them without doing any drug susceptibility testing. And so 3 of the children in this family are still alive today, but the gentleman in the striped shirt, Raoul, ultimately died of his disease. And so this was a very young family. There were many, many, many like them. Seeing them was heartbreaking. Seeing their suffering was devastating. Spending time with them, I learned a great deal, and I'm very thankful to them. So imagine the shock that I had when consulting the guidelines, the global guidelines put out by the World Health Organization for the management of drug-resistant TB in 1997, the same year I met this family, that said this: with these considerations in mind, a specialized unit for dealing with MDR tuberculosis may reasonably be regarded as an expensive luxury, which is only affordable where national resources are moderate or good. And I'm sharing this not as a critique of the World Health Organization, because I think people who work on TB at the World Health Organization are incredible people, right? They could be working on something else. They could be working somewhere else. They're really dedicated people. But the prevailing public health thinking at the time really swayed, their ability to see what was going on. Sorry. Oh my gosh, this is so horrifying. Hotels are terrible for a lot of reasons.
We can't hear it, so
Okay, great,
you're actually
great.
fine.
Oh, sorry. But it really through their public health lens that they could make a statement like this in guidelines, mind you, in guidelines. And it wasn't just them. It was actually TB providers at multiple levels who espoused really negative views towards the very people they were charged with providing care for. And I bring this up partly because I think it's important to be self-reflective of our own field. And I think Kelly will probably agree with me on this. It's easy to point the finger at other people, but it's important to look at our own profession. But I think when we think about the idea of stigma and othering, we think it's a problem of the general population, that it's a problem of, we just need to educate people about this. We just need to, inform them and they'll stop acting in this way. But what I experienced and what I want to share tonight is that the stigma, discrimination, and othering that characterized TB occurred primarily among public health practitioners and doctors, right? That it was at those levels where these very negative attitudes and stigma and discrimination were both coming from and people were encountering them. So this is actually an article by a very prominent American TB physician where he was talking about people with drug-resistant TB and ironically trying to offer a humane approach to dealing with them other than let them die. But here he said, we took 21 non-compliant people whose sputums were positive and treated them as outpatients. They all had cavitary tuberculosis. We used supervised daily treatment with each regimen, including an injectable drug, which was the leash, right? So in talking about, right, like he uses the term leash as if, these are not human individuals. And these things were pervasive. I could spend the whole night showing you examples of this. And again, it's not to demean my colleagues. It's just to say this was present at the highest echelons. And I was lucky enough to be trained by Paul Farmer because he saw these things very clearly and also wrote about them very clearly, sort of saying the excuses of our time are ingenious. Failure to provide access to treatment becomes reframed, right? Instead of saying we're failing and doing what we need to do for people diagnosed with drug-resistant TB, it became it's their fault. They didn't take the drugs the way they were supposed to. Right. And then it becomes a public health issue, right? Well, listen, my job is to prevent resistance, right? Let's not burn through these drugs. Let's not waste these drugs. I remember a time where the leading sentence in every publication about drug-resistant TB said the goal of drug-resistant TB treatment is to prevent the development of additional resistance. And we would just ask, but shouldn't the goal be to provide the best possible care for people who are diagnosed with the disease? And I cannot tell you how many times people pushed back and said no. So this is Paul writing in 2003. But unfortunately, I think a lot of this othering still occurs today in current TB policy and practice. One of the ways we see it is this idea of directly observed therapy. Those of you who were fortunate enough, whether you were from Massachusetts or not, to spend time with people who've been treated for any form of TB, you probably heard in their stories this idea of directly observed therapy, right? They had to be watched taking their treatment. And I'm a doctor for other things besides TB when I'm in the US. There is no other disease I know that we do this, where you start with someone who's been diagnosed with a health problem from a fundamental place of mistrust, right? I don't trust you, right? That's what we're saying to people when they're put on directly observed therapy. Not, I spent time listening to you. I see you as an equal partner in this treatment journey we're about to embark on together. So I don't trust you. And so DOT is, I think some people might need it, but to use it so widely as a cornerstone, a pillar of TB treatment is something I find worrisome. TB also has a one-size-fits-all approach, right? The US is a little bit better about this than most places, but everybody's going to get the same treatment no matter what, right? We're looking for a universal regimen. We're trying to, keep it simple and make sure, everybody gets the same thing. And some of this might be for ease, but some of it is very dehumanizing. And, if you don't believe that it's dehumanizing, Kelly can tell you. But even in research studies that are going on now about tuberculosis, I'm a behavioral scientist as well as being an infectious disease doctor. And when I ask people, right, did you talk to the participants in your trial about their preferences about treatment? They look at me like, what do you mean, right? Why would we ask them that? Shorter is better. Shorter is better, right? A shorter regimen is better. If 6 months is good, then 4 months is better, and then 3 months. And there's this race in TV right now. I call it the race to shorter, right? Whereas it doesn't matter if it's 4 months, but it requires you to take 30 tablets a day. If 4 months is better than 6, it doesn't matter if it's 4 months and it causes your skin to change colors so that everybody notices a change in your appearance and asks you what's wrong. And so it's this, we're not even going to ask people, we assume everybody has the same preferences and the same needs. And there's these repeated cycles of dehumanizing care and research in the name of good public health practice. And then one of the areas where I see this happening a lot, I'm a drug-resistant TB doctor, is when we have new drugs that come out, one of the first things people say is we have to protect the drugs, right? I was working on drug-resistant TB in 2012, 2013 when bedaquiline came out. Bedaquiline was one of our newer TB drugs about 14 years ago. And at the time it was coming onto the market, treatment for drug-resistant TB lasted for 24 months and included a daily injection, right? And it was miserable. It made probably half the people who received it deaf. They lost their hearing. And so we started using bedaquiline. I was working with Doctors Without Borders in South Africa to manage hearing loss or to prevent hearing loss. And people would, I got shouted at a meeting in Chicago, I will not see you burn through these drugs. We have to protect the drugs. And I thought, protect them from who, right? And protect them for who, right? And inherent in some of these discussions, which are often cloaked in a mantle of public health responsibility, was the idea that there may be some people who deserve new medications and some people who don't. But underlying it all is this dehumanizing experience that people who are diagnosed with TB face. And so I think the missing thing, I mean, I'd love to have a new diagnostic. I'd love to have, a long-acting injectable. But I think what we're missing the most in TB, and it's a harder problem to solve, I think, is compassion. There's a lack of compassion. There's a lack of empathy. And what I really admired about Everything is Tuberculosis, and what I admire so much about all of you in the TB fighters, is that you approach your work from a space of compassion, right? And compassion means you recognize that somebody's suffering. You care about it, and then you take action to help. And I think that compassion piece is missing especially from the healthcare providers and the systems that are charged with helping people during a difficult time in their life when they're diagnosed with TB. So how do we make TB care more humanistic? And I have pictures of two of my colleagues here. The gentleman in the gray is Goodman Makanda, and the woman standing in the black is Busisiwe Beko. They are both DRTB survivors, and they have both taught me more about drug-resistant TB and being humanistic than I ever learned in school, and that I ever learned in most of my time going to WHO meetings. And I think that's the first step in asking providers to listen, asking public health practitioners to listen. This becomes a challenge, right? Because in public health and in medical practice right now, there's a trend toward tokenism, right? Where everyone's like, oh, I don't want Jen Furin yelling at me that, I'm not humanistic. So let's have one person with TB come to our guideline meeting. And then we can check that box off, and we won't do anything to prepare him or her. And, then we can say we involved a survivor and everyone will leave us alone. And it's unfortunate because it kind of takes like, it doesn't take the meat out of the fight, but what it does is it neutralizes the perspectives that multiple people with TB might have, right? That Kelly doesn't necessarily feel the same as I do about things, or as Kate. And by not listening to people and assuming one person can speak for everybody and that we should pat ourselves on the back, I think it's inappropriate. And so I just want to finish by talking about a piece of work that I'm doing right now. You stick around long enough, you get to do the job you first started doing. As my mother used to say, penny loafers come back into style, right? Like it's just, so I started working on drug-resistant TB back in 1996 when the drugs were really terrible and things were really bad. And, thanks to people like Carol Mitnick and a lot of really brilliant TB clinicians and researchers, treatment of drug-resistant TB now is 4 drugs for 6 months. Like, it's awesome compared to what it used to be. But there will always be people who can't be cured by those regimens because TB is a wily bug. And like any bacteria, resistance happens. Resistance exists. We select for it. So I am now in a position where I am working with people whose strains of TB have resistance to the new drugs. Like, they're not new anymore, to drugs like bedaquiline and linezolid and protomanid. So they actually require treatment again with a 24-month regimen consisting of 7, 8, sometimes 9 drugs, including the terrible old injectable drug. There's new drugs coming out, but we're fighting the same battles with the companies to try to get access to them. And the same arguments that I heard in 1997 when I was a young woman, and now I'm an older middle-aged woman, I hear them all over again. We don't need drug susceptibility testing. We can just treat everybody's easier that way. One size fits all. If people have resistance to bedaquiline, it's because they did something wrong. If their strain has resistance, excuse me, it's because they did something wrong. They didn't take their drugs. It's all this blaming and shaming and this lack of willingness to partner with people. And so in this space, we have a group, it's called the Better Project for Building Experience Treating TB with Expanded Resistance. But like the acronym was deliberately chosen to try to encourage us to do better and be better. And one of the things that we're trying to introduce, in addition to new drugs and new diagnostics, is a new idea, which is this concept of shared decision making. Right, that you may think, right, the doctor knows everything, but in a consultation room, and I spend most of my time working with people who have TB, we both come into that space. And we've agreed to be in that space together. Maybe I've agreed more than they have, but we're sharing this space together. And I have a certain level of expertise. I went to school for a really long time, but the person who's coming there newly diagnosed with drug-resistant TB also has expertise that's probably more important than mine, right? And that not just me wagging my finger and saying, you need to do this or that. We need to come up with a shared decision about the therapeutic path we want to take together going forward. And it's this idea of listening, acknowledging that one size doesn't fit all, that I may have some answers, but not all the answers. They may have some answers, but not all the answers, right? And that we're better as a unit in which we share the space. And it's a sacred space, the clinic. It's a sacred space, right? And we do better when we share that space. So we're trying to introduce this concept, which is very popular in HIV, but it's never made its way over to TB and shared decision making. And then the last thing I want to mention is, in addition to doing that one-on-one in the clinic room, where I spend a lot of time with providers trying to talk to them about this stuff and say, listen, you have to listen. And I said, no, we don't have time for that. Like we always have time for that, right? I've worked in clinics where I've had 70 people waiting to see me right outside my door. I can't spend an hour with people, but I sure can spend 5 minutes with them. And it's always faster and it goes better if we're partners in it than, if I try to tell them what to do in 3 minutes and run on to the next thing. So there's that one-on-one, but there's also this idea of how do we reimagine community engagement? And this is a paper that was lead authored by my colleague Ashna Shesh that really looks at how do we reimagine community engagement in TB. And it's not, we tell them what to do. We invite a survivor to come along so that we can say, hey, we checked with the community about this and they're okay with our plans. There has to be a shift in how we do things. And this means sharing power. It means sharing funding. It means that I go to training from the community to hear about their perspectives and needs, that I offer training to them to share, my specialized medical knowledge, and that we co-create things together. It's not that I come up with a proposal and then I go to them saying, please sign off on this, $10 million potentially for people with TB. It means, what do you think we should do about this problem? And figuring out a way together, right, to work on it. And so I shared this paper and I'm happy to share it more widely because it's really worth a read, because I'm not doing it justice here because I want to stop yammering. As my husband will tell you, I could talk about TB my whole life and not be done talking about TB. But I want to give Kelly some time to reflect on some of the things that I've been talking about here. And yeah, just to thank all of you for your time and perspective tonight. This is my email up here. I'm always happy to get email about TB. I love to think and talk about TB and figure out how to do a better job on TB. And then I just want to acknowledge, this is my colleague Pumeza Tisile here. The many brave men, women, children, gender neutral folks, people who've gone before on this path of active partnership, when it was a hard path to be on. I was in Cape Town a decade ago at the TB meetings were held in a high burden country for one of the first times. And we invited some people who had been diagnosed with drug-resistant TB to come to the meeting. And their reception was terrible. People were accusing them of spreading. I mean, it was awful. I was so ashamed. But, these are brave men and women and people and children and mothers and fathers who came forward to tell their story. And I try to muster an ounce of their bravery, both to face this disease, but to face a sometimes not terribly sympathetic general public, and even worse, a not very sympathetic medical community. So yeah, I'll stop there. I'm gonna stop sharing and I'll turn it over to Kelly and to Tori. And yeah, thanks to all of you for your time and your work.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for that. Tori, if you don't mind, I had a couple of reflections
Please.
and
There's
questions.
a reason we wanted you to be here, Kelly, and it's
Great.
for your reflections.
Okay, great. Well, I'm grateful for that. Just a couple things really stood out, Jen. I always appreciate, for those of you who don't, Jen has come and spoken to We Are TB. So We Are TB is a survivor support community based here in the United States. We have members, TB survivors all over the country. We have virtual meetings once a week to just be together and try to offer support and our own experiences, and then every other week in Spanish. But I think a solution to a lot of these things is connection, as Jen pointed out. The last part just so struck me of imagining you all gathering drug-resistant TB survivors to come be a part of this meeting and to have the reception you had, and sort of looking to your survivor peers as like for their courage. It's just a very hard thing to picture and very visceral for what it would have been like for them to be in that space. And I just wanted to contrast that because you opened in such a special way of acknowledging the TB fighters. And I couldn't imagine a more opposite experience as a being a TB survivor walking into a TB fighter meeting. I feel like a celebrity of someone
You are.
who is honored and treasured. And when when you and I met before, you speak to me as an expert and in a way that is genuine and ask for my expertise of my one lived experience, and acknowledging that Kate or Tenzin or any other expert in the room is an expert in their own experience. But I think it's a real testament to the TB fighters, knowing that similar situation where you have a group of people gathered together to talk about TB, where the survivors in one are uplifted. And so that's a credit to the TB fighters in the environment that you all have created, because I can only speak for myself in this, but I, as a TB survivor, have never felt anything but welcome. So I think if I was thinking of the opposite of the othering that Jen talked about is the togethering that the TB fighters really do. And so there's a lot of gratitude I felt. And so much of what, Jen, you were talking about still rings true about the directly observed therapy. I think in Massachusetts, there's still actually a law that if you don't take your TB meds, you're officially a public menace, and you can be declared a menace and then locked up and forced to take your drugs, which is not true if you don't take your blood pressure medicine, as it turns out. But the other piece that really stuck out, and Jen, I guess my question thinking too is, I felt this in a small way myself when I was having treatment, but so much of the othering and the stigma can be turned internally on the patient themselves. And it can be hard to engage when I know myself, I felt a lot of tremendous guilt of who I may have exposed, what I might have done, the stress I was putting on my family, my colleagues. And I think I would like to hear some of your thoughts of when, in your experience, when you encounter, uh, you speak very beautifully about the external stigmas, how you will go and say and shout at that meeting, that is not okay. You cannot have a token survivor and not let them share their experience. Or you cannot have this here. When that stigma is internalized, what have you encountered? What have your colleagues taught you on how to combat that, which seems can be more subtle but equally challenging in how to engage people and help them?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I think it's a great question, right? And I think the first is, as a provider, to acknowledge that that person is probably having that happen, right? And so I just often say it, boy, I bet you're probably being pretty hard on yourself about this right now. But then, you look at some of the things that we do in TB, right? Like my example where I talk about internal stigma is around contact tracing, right? Because it's like, I have this and I gave it to other people. And I've heard providers say that you need to go home and tell your whole family to come here because you may have given them TB, right? And I mean, when the doctors and the nurses and the public health providers are saying that, like, how do you not think about that, right? And so again, I think it's about the words we use. And what I learned from a TB survivor in Romania, she was really mad, and she said, I don't understand how this happened to me. All I did was breathe, right? And boy, was there a lot of wisdom in that. I said, because we all breathe, right? Everybody breathes. And like, we've tried a few like stigma reduction campaigns in high TB burden settings around that concept, like everybody breathes. But I think I also will give people with TB, I ask them how they're feeling about it. They may not. I mean, it's scary, right? Like this stuff happens even not with TB, right? You're told you have diabetes. It's terrifying. It's isolating. You feel alone, right? Like there are these common things that happen when someone is diagnosed or given a diagnosis, right? But I think they're compounded by TB because of the airborne nature of things. And so what I try to do is also give people positive language. Like, boy, your family's really lucky that you came and got this diagnosis, because what we find is that when people share the same air, they're probably not the only person, right, with TB. And oh my gosh, isn't it wonderful that and now you can really help your family, right? And so it's that, but like when you try to do that in a space where all the providers are saying is you gave it to someone, you did this, right? And so to me, it's helping people find the true positives. I mean, I don't tell people false things, right? I'm not like, oh, isn't it great to have TB? But I do think that when people present to care and they're given a diagnosis, it is an opportunity, right, for other people who may have shared the same air that they shared, who could have been exposed another, right? Like it's a good thing to find out. It's a good thing to have that come to light. And so we work a lot, especially with colleagues at TAG, at Treatment Action Group, around disclosure counseling. And how do we talk about this? HIV had a similar thing, but HIV wasn't like, I don't know, I only had to tell people I had sex with, right? Not everybody, like not my neighbor at work, right? And so I think we need to do a better job with disclosure counseling, but also helping be someone who counteracts some of those negative feelings people may be having about themselves. Even the act of isolation, right? It's like you put someone in isolation, that's terrifying. It's terrifying. And people have a lot of time on their hands and a lot of fear, and all they're going to do is think about who else. I remember that happening during COVID. And so I think I always try to give people the truth, which is you were the first one that came, but it doesn't mean you were the start of all this. And, yeah. So I think to me, it's making sure there's positive messaging in there, not just negative messaging.
Well, I really appreciate that, Jen. I think even just as you're describing this now, instead of talking about Kelly, the germs came from you into these other people in your family, talking about this germ in our shared air, that this is our shared air. Even that description there, I wrote it down because I want to be able to talk about that either in advocacy moves or with my own patients, that this is our shared air as opposed to Kelly's lungs, to your lungs. This is a shared air, and especially if, again, we're not saying that you're the source because you may not be. It's part of our job to make sure if there's other people with it, not who did you give it to, but who else do I need to treat so that they don't get sick. And I think those bits of language really do matter. And so even if your patients may hear it in other settings, at least when they're sitting with you, they can have that bit of positivity for which I'm grateful that they have that.
Yeah, and Treatment Action Group has a nice set of documents on this that we worked on putting together around disclosure counseling and this concept of shared air. Because I do think it's true, and it also is a much more thoughtful way. So instead of being the person who gave your family TB, you can be the person who helped everybody find out whether or not they needed treatment or prevent it. It's a much more, but until we see people with TB as human actors who are capable of, they're very altruistic and very, I just think we like to say, oh, they're bad, they did something wrong, they're over there, they're not like me, when in fact they're exactly like us, all of us. And but providers are some of the worst perpetrators of this. And
Yeah. We'll reach out to our friends at TAG and see if we can get links to those documents and put them in the description of the video when we do, and we'll share them out across TB resources. But one of the common themes that I was hearing throughout that was kind of the language around removing fault from the patient. And that's not something that seems to have come through a lot when specifically talking about drug resistance. And so I was wondering if you kind of have any thoughts on that spin, because there was a lot of discussion in the chat of the video talking about a just kind of, the DOT program can feel kind of gross, and it's a lot how they treat, patients on methadone have to go through a similar process, and there's still a lot of stigma there as well. And while it can be helpful or supportive for people who are maybe forgetful, there's still there's a doctor in the chat who had heard the medication referred to as a leash like this year, and that's not at all. So, what are some ways to kind of flip that specific language around drug resistance around?
Yeah, in some ways, I think, for all the challenges that general TB or regular TB, like it is, engenders, I think with drug-resistant TB, sometimes it's harder because the assumption, if you have drug-resistant TB, is that you really did something wrong. That the only way you get drug-resistant TB is because you didn't take your medicine the way that you were supposed to, right? And so much of what I learned in the 90s around this was watching these debates take place in high levels, and it was assumed if you had drug-resistant TB, you did something wrong. To the point that really smart scientists would come out and say things like, well, drug-resistant TB isn't transmissible, right? Because the bacteria, because it mutated, it's not transmissible,
So it
right?
goes back to normal when it goes to the next person?
Right,
Oh
when
Like,
it
no,
goes in the air, it explodes.
it goes in the air and it can't infect anybody. It can't, right? Or, well, maybe it can go in the air and infect people, but it won't make them sick, right? These were facts that were never, ever demonstrated by anything. But I remember some of the earliest parts of my not so illustrious research career was writing papers to prove that drug-resistant TB was transmissible, that it was virulent. Like it wasn't enough that hundreds of people were dying of it in this small community in Peru, right? So, well, they must have done something else. They must have done something wrong. I remember, so I take care of children with tuberculosis, not because I'm a pediatrician, I'm an adult provider, but with a child with drug-resistant TB, you can't, the only way they get it is if it comes through the air. That's the only way they get it, right? Adults were complicated, right? And so like, if you look at anybody's history, like no one takes their drugs 100% of the time. Nobody. But with kids, like it was, I mean, people tried to blame the parents of the kids, but like if a kid had drug-resistant TB, it went through the air and made the kid sick. And so I remember I was in Peru and they're like, we don't have drug-resistant TB. And the WHO is saying there's no drug-resistant TB in Peru. And there was a little boy who had it. And I remember that my colleagues would come to where we were working at midnight and pick me up and take me to the back entrance of the children's hospital so I could secretly treat this child. And like the political forces that were amassed against this child and all of us who were just trying to take care of him, like I had no idea. I was so naive in 1997. But if you showed a child had it, it meant it was transmitted through the air. And you're thinking, but of course it's transmitted through the air, right? Of course it is. And so like, I think that was the part that was really surprising to me. With drug-resistant TB, it just takes all the stereotypes and prejudices that we have about people with TB in general, and it really distills them down. And every so often, I think we're making progress. And then, like, I'm working now with the people whose strains of TB have bedaquiline resistance, and it's like all over again. We have to lock these people up. We have to put them, in situations where they can't get out and hurt people. I've done a lot of work in South Africa. And for many of you, I mean, Robben Island was where during apartheid, they put like Nelson Mandela and all the anti-apartheid activists because they were so dangerous. Robben Island's like out in the middle, of the ocean and you can't get off it. And to this day in South Africa, there are always people who will stand up and say, you know what, we should put people with drug-resistant TB on Robben Island. And that is one small example. It's an example I know. So it's this idea of dangerous people, othering people. We do it with other diseases, right? But why are we participating in that as providers, right? It's this idea of drugs. Don't put the drug out there. Why would you have treatment that's shitty? It's 24 months with a daily injection. You get the first new drug that comes along in 50 years, and people say, don't use it. We have to save it. What is that about,
Like, who
right?
are
And
we saving it for if not the people who have the disease that need to be treated by it? Us?
that's exactly, well, Tori, in some ways, I heard that kind of talk mostly from providers in the US. And again, it's this all the swirling cauldron of othering, right? Oh, it
Mhm.
must be those bad people in South Africa, right? Let's save the drug for when we need it, with the bias inherent in that was when it comes to America, right? And we see that
Mhm.
now, even with some of, like, I love Hilde. I really, but I'm always fearful of my own self because I'm a little bit of a hothead and I can say things. And sometimes it's like, we have to, we can keep Americans safe by tackling TB where it's most prevalent. That is like a dog whistle in some ways for immigration and shutting the borders, right? And boy, and they tried to do that last year with TB as the reason. And so I think this is a disease that, because we can't feel compassion as people, as providers, it persists. And John hints at this a lot. John doesn't just hint at it, John will come out and say it, right? But I think sometimes for me, I can do a study or try to find a new drug. How do I teach compassion? How do I teach compassion to the world? And I think the TB fighters do it well. You're present, you make space for people, who are different or who might be othered. But I think sometimes the best I can do is try to bring it to my daily life and my daily interactions. And I'm lucky because I get to work with people who have drug-resistant TB, and I hope it will ease things a little bit. But some of it too is just about modeling. How do we model this for each other? How do we, yeah, and just saying, some of it's calling it out, right? Like, yeah, when you talk about protecting drugs, that's not good public health practice. That's discrimination.
Mhm. Yeah, and it is such a hard, compassion shouldn't be a muscle. We shouldn't have to tell people that they should care about other people. And yet, so often that's the place that we're in. And I think that we kind of have, as TB fighters, but as just advocates as a whole, a lot of work to do to create more opportunities and spaces for everybody to get that feeling of I am a TB fighter or a TB survivor and I'm in this place and I'm being celebrated because I did something that was really hard and I came out the other side of it and people want to learn about that. Um, so if you have ideas on how we can create more opportunities to do that or to share that out, I would be very interested in hearing that and we can maybe find some more pieces there. But there's one other piece that has come through in a few places, which is talking about kind of the partnerships and the various people we have to work with to get this done, right? And creating those spaces and kind of taking these new approaches and building compassion. And I'm wondering that, you mentioned being snuck in the back of a hospital, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting example of partnership there. What are some of the kind of partnerships in the world of TB that have surprised you by how valuable they were and how they have come about? And Kelly, I'm going to send that question to you as well, because I think that your experience is uh, going to be interesting here too.
I'm going to let Kelly answer that first because I have some ideas, but I'm so curious to hear what his are.
Yeah, well, I would say some of the uh, some of the partnerships that I see often between um, I can think about from We Are TB is just the survivors themselves, like getting people with shared lived experience together, and just seeing uh, how much relief that can bring to someone. So many times, so many of our, which is hard. Again, this has to do with all the things that Jen is saying about how we as clinicians talk about this, or we as a society handle this. So many of our We Are TB members will come in and say, I thought I was crazy that I was experiencing this. And I realized that I'm alone. I'll never forget one of our Somos TB members was describing when she was, unfortunately, her grandmother was in the hospital at one point, and years before, and she remembers the whole family was sitting around the hospital bed, on the hospital bed, all the generations. They were knitting and sharing food, and they're like, yes, grandma's sick, but we're all here together. And then when she was hospitalized with TB in her bone marrow, she was looking around an empty hospital room, no people, just alone. And I think so that many of the partnerships that have been most inspiring to me is seeing other TB survivors just come together and say, you're not alone. You're not crazy. And so I think that's so much of what I see of how the getting other survivors together and how powerful it is who thought that they were just losing their minds, that they were, again, having a lot of that internalized stigma, but really uh, that solidarity, I think, really was moving, and to see that the healing power of that. So I'll start with that. I'm thinking also about other work, but I got to think some more about outside of We Are TB for that. But I'll start with that one.
Yeah, from my side, it's lawyers. As a doctor, like, ooh, I cringe a little at lawyers, right? But like the truth of the matter is where compassion cannot be encouraged and fostered, I think sometimes having legal providers who can say this is against the law really helps. And I think about a couple of instances where that was the case. So one of my favorite lawyers and human beings on this planet is a human rights lawyer from Kenya whose name is Alan Maleche. And I first met Alan in Nairobi when he was working to make it illegal in Kenya to put people with TB in jail for not taking their medication, because that's what they do in a lot of places. And I think too about like the lawyer like Anand Grover, who I mean, if you all read John's book, which I'm assuming you all did, the story of Shreya Tripathi, the brave young woman from India who sued the Indian government. Anand Grover represented her at great personal cost, right? Many of us who were involved with trying to support Shreya as she sued the Indian government, um, um, like it was shocking the extent that they went to like smear us all and make us feel miserable. But many of us were outside of India. That didn't matter to me. But a lot of the people who were in India, they really, and I mean that's what human rights lawyers do. But yeah, I've really, and they look at things differently. They understand that some of this is going to be uncomfortable. And then I guess the other one to me, and it's not, I mean, we look at them as partners all the time, but it's donors, right? Like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, it can't be done for free, right? It can't be like people need their time compensated. And I'm not talking about the doctors and public health people. I'm talking about if we really want to partner with impacted populations, like that have to also be given the same considerations in terms of grant money and management that everybody else is. And donors are very risk averse. They want after 3 years to have something to show for it. And they don't invest in a lot of the building work that needs to be done. You can't go from saying, listen to survivors and then, never do anything to make sure they're at the table at an equal place. So those to me are, but I've grown to really love the lawyers.
As a person who loves one specific lawyer, I have to say that they do have some merit. But they're okay.
Well,
Yeah, that's
Jen,
an
I
interesting
think
one.
just going to add to that, Troy. I think your point too of that if in thinking about if you really want to partner, and our colleague from We Are TB, Kate O'Brien, is always very good about this, is she insists that if survivors are being invited to a talk or to do something, they must be compensated for their time. Because if you, not because it's about the money itself, but that if you want this, people have jobs. And if you really want to be serious about this, then you need to be serious. And she's been very good at helping me because I'll say, oh, we can just do this. She's like, that's not the point, Kelly. The point is if this organization, if they're serious about engaging with survivors, then they need to, as you said, if they want to be serious about it, they need to compensate people for their expertise, just like they would if they had someone else coming in. They would have to, for their expertise, they would have to do the same thing because most people with TB TB survivors are not walking around with tons of disposable income to make the flights and do this, which is why they're excluded. And so I always appreciate it helped me view things differently to talk about that. To your, I think your donor comment was really well said, and also the lawyer piece. I mean, we can't necessarily always convince them with good arguments. I think sometimes I feel like I have these perfect arguments in my head, and they just don't work. And so knowing where else, what other channels we have, that we can make the perfect argument, and it may not be enough if there's not enough compassion. So we can keep building that, but we need some backup.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes too, it's also looking at ourselves, right? Like I think a lot of us in this space are like, well, I must be a good person because I'm working on TB, right? I mean, maybe we don't say that out loud, but there's this, and I just remember some of the best lessons I've learned have been when I've like gut checked myself with a member of my group of friends and colleagues who survived DRTB. Like when we were doing bedaquiline, I was breaking my back behind the scenes to try to get bedaquiline in South Africa. And they like agreed to like, give us like 10 courses. And I went to some of my survivor friends, like, yay, look what we did. And they're like, 10? Are you kidding me? And I was like, well, listen, you have to understand. And my colleague, Busi Bako, she said, Jen, I don't have to understand anything. These are our lives you're talking about. And like, I was a bit God bless her because she didn't take my crap, like that's right, exactly right. So I think we don't all have to agree, and sometimes we have to call each other out. So having people who have a much bigger stake in this than I do, gut check me, those are probably my most important partners. And I don't think we do that enough.
Yeah. And sometimes people just don't think that you want their opinion, so they don't offer it when they think that there can be something better. And I think that that's something that we can all learn in a lot of different areas, right? Like, don't want to be seen as calling someone out, but you might have a perspective that they haven't thought of. I'm going to ask two more questions. And one is a little bit of a divergence, but I think it's a really interesting question. And it's from Michelle, which is, do you find it hard to code switch between the anthropology and behavioral language with the medical language? And what do you gain by being educated in both disciplines? And what do you think they have to learn from one another?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do sometimes, but like I guess I don't worry about it as much as I probably
Mhm.
should. Like medicine has such a sterile language, like and if you don't speak the sterile language, supposedly you're not objective and you're not going to take good care of people. But like I was fortunate enough to train with people who didn't believe that, and I don't believe it either. What I think the most important thing that I learned as an anthropologist was to listen to people and understand them on their own terms. And I'm glad I did that before I went to medical school, because medical school scared me. It should scare everybody. The amount of things that I had to learn so that I wouldn't kill people with my incompetence was like really high. And I think we use that sometimes as an excuse, not to remember that people are people. And so I was glad I had years of my life dedicated just to listening to people who were going through a really difficult health experience. And then I think sometimes as doctors, we think, well, we have to build up defenses so we can be objective. But it's like, I love the patients that I work with. Like I have to be able to take care of them, but I have to have love in my heart for them. And if I don't, then maybe I'm not going to be a very good doctor. I don't like them all. And they don't all like me, but yeah. So I guess I think sometimes we tell ourselves stories about what kind of people doctors have to be so they can take care of us, and I don't believe those stories anymore. And being an anthropologist, I think, taught me that. But I don't know, Kelly, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the anthropology background, but I certainly know that the language and the separation, I do treat patients with TB now, and I show them a picture of my son who had all of his secretions fluorescent orange from the rifampin he was taking. And I said, this is like, I would never give you a medicine that I wouldn't take myself. And I love that I can tell people that. And I think there's some of and I say, I've sat in that seat. And now I sit in this seat. Like you will not be in that seat forever. I promise you. And I will make sure that you're not in that seat forever. And I think there is some of the sterility that that Jen is talking about, that you can't share things like that. I think it's a tremendous. I'm so grateful. I've had patients who I've treated for TB who have kids the same age as my son. I was like, I'm going to put your son, like our kids' boogers are going to look the same. It's going to be hilarious. And they're like, oh, doesn't feel hilarious right now. I'm like, it will. We'll laugh about this. We're good. And so I think that, as you said, just being a human being who has the expertise, but being a human being first, I think is tremendous, Jen. And I agree with you 100%.
And I think, sorry, Tori, I know like two questions
Keep
and
answering.
like ramble on and on. But part of it, right, is this power differential that inherent in all of this, right, is that doctors and healthcare providers have power over people who are sick, right? Because you're sick, so something's not going your way, right? And I know how to take that sickness away. And we're very invested in that. So this idea of I can only take care of you if I somehow distance, but I mean, listen, it is hard sometimes. I'll go home from the hospital at the end of the day and I'm sad and I'm stressed, but like I know how to take care of myself after years of therapy, right? Like, but like it's that idea, that power differential. And I think sharing stories like Kelly did, sharing the human side of a physician or a care provider with the human side of someone seeking care, it helps in shared decision making. Like, I don't want to put my problems on someone who's sick, but when I can share with them, you know what, I went through this with my, brother-in-law. It matters. It matters. And so it's that we are human together in this. And
Yeah.
how do we do that more is really important.
I liked that discussion. It happened early in your talk too, of that dynamic of power sharing, right? Because as a patient, I am giving up a good piece of, my body and my health to the decisions, and I'm putting that trust. And I think that having that go both ways is an important part to that healthy relationship. So, yeah, I think that that's a big learning, and maybe getting some of those pieces of education back out there for I know all of the doctors that we've spoken to in the space of TB are already kind of there. So like we're very spoiled and very lucky. We see people who have this very, very much shared perspective. But that's an important dynamic. But the question that we always like to end these streams on TB Fighters, we are very big fans of the concept of hope over here at TB Fighters. And so we always like to end by asking our guests, what right now in the world of TB is giving you hope or keeping you hopeful? Things are really bad in the world right now in general, and we try to, say, all right, what are the people who are kind of accompanying us on this journey? What's keeping them going so we can hang on to that too? So, Kelly, you've
Why
answered
don't,
this
yeah,
one for me before, but I'm going to make you answer it again.
go ahead, Kelly. Why don't you start?
Well, I think I will answer it again for Tori, similarly to last time, because I think it still really rings true for me, and it rang even more true after TB Hill Day. And it's paraphrasing our dear friend and colleague Kate O'Brien from We Are TB, but saying that I am in the TB space because of the TB in my lungs. That's how I got here. And so to share this time with the TB fighters who are here, even though this didn't happen to them, uh, and doing this for people they will never meet, is something that gives me hope and inspires me. Because I can think of the people who are living with TB that I'm treating, and I can say I can do this for this individual, and you're doing this without knowing that person, and that gives me tremendous inspiration and hope.
And I'm going to be a copycat of Kelly because I'm going to say the same thing. The thing that has given me the most hope in working on TB in the last 2 years has been working with the TB fighters. I mean, there's always going to be new drugs and new diagnostics, and yet there will always be resistance and something, right? And it's only through community. I'm a chatty lady. I'm going to tell one quick story from Hill Day. I had the privilege of not only attending my state meetings, but attending some other state meetings to back up some of the TB fighters. And there was one state that I went to their meetings with them where I had asked healthcare providers from that state if they would come for Hill Day, and they said no because they were too frightened. And these are people who love people with TB, who care for them, who it's their daily job. And they were too scared to go to TB Hill Day. And there were these two brave TB fighters. And I thought, okay, I don't know what it's going to look like. And I don't know how we're going to get there. But I know that we're walking together with a bigger group of braver and more compassionate people than I've ever walked with before. And I've walked with some great people before. But that was when I left Hill Day thinking about those two brave TB fighters. I thought it's going to be better. And yeah, that's what I think about. It's never wrong to be brave and to say the right thing. And there they were, and they know who they are. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have to tell people like gotta stop saying us for the answer to that question, even though it is one of the most rewarding and hopeful things. And I, again, can only speak for myself on this one, but everything that we put into TB fighting, I get back tenfold. Like there's no drain in this. It is only, positive growth and improvement, like that just blind confidence that we will in some point in our lifetime say TB was the world's deadliest infectious disease. Like that is just what we hang on to over here. But we are incredibly grateful for your time. And on that subject of good news and hope, I am actually going to be really excited to share slash thank a bunch of our TB fighters who have been doing really amazing work on the House Dear Colleague letters. We had 133 signatures on the TB letter and 171 on the Global Fund letter, which is incredibly impressive just given how short that timeline was. It was like just a couple of days. So just a huge shout out to everybody who worked on getting those out there and signed. We've also put in a record number of appropriations forms, which is an incredibly complicated process and terrifying to think that that's how our government works. But we've still got a lot of those going. And so I do want to, we're in our announcements section now. I do want to plug that we're going to continue to be having our advocacy sessions, which is where a bunch of us jump on a Google Meet and we work on things like, appropriations forms and, we were reaching out about Dear Colleague letters. We'll continue to do that in the Senate. We're doing some data cleanup for KJ's project. We are writing op-eds and letters to the editor. We just kind of get together as a group and do our homework together so that it's a little less intimidating and we have people to bounce our questions off of. And if anybody's interested in joining one of those, they are on our calendar, our Google Calendar. They get scheduled pretty regularly, so just keep an eye on that and keep an eye on our newsletter as we send those out. The link to subscribe to that is probably in the chat or in the doobly-doo. Somebody's going to put it somewhere really useful. I'm also going to just pass it back to Kelly one more time to mention where you can get in touch with We Are TB, because that is another one of our very important resources out there. We want to make sure everybody knows.
Thank you, Tori, for the reminder. So yes, so anyone who watches this, if you or somebody you love has been affected by tuberculosis infection or disease, please, you can go to wearetb.com and reach out to us. We have the virtual support spaces in English and Spanish, but also our members speak many other languages, and we would just send out said, if I would like to speak to someone who speaks my language, who knows a little bit about what I'm experiencing, we'll reach out. And if we have someone who speaks that language, we can try to meet you in any way that you need, in any way that we can. So wearetb.com.
Best people. And then two other quick things. Our book club is just finishing up Stigmatized, which is a memoir of a young TB survivor in Mongolia. And I feel like that's very relevant to our conversation tonight. So there's still some time to catch up on that and join the conversation over on the book club Discord. And then on April 1st, we are starting Illness as Metaphor and AIDS and Its Metaphors by Susan Sontag. And that reading period is going to go from April 1st to May 31st. So you can kind of keep in touch over on Book Club. I'm very excited about both of those reads. And then one last piece is that if you are enjoying TB Ed Talks, we have our archive. If you missed any of our past ones, you can check those out on our website, see what all the fun is while we wait and try to announce our April talk, which should be coming the next couple of days. Not April, the talk that we're going to be doing in April. April kind of, but no, we've still got some time. It's only mid-May or March. Oh gosh. Time is hard for me, guys. Time is a thing I struggle with. But we're really excited to share. We've got a bunch of cool things coming up. So if you're not subscribed to the TB Fighters newsletter, that is the best way to keep a handle on what is going on. I think that's everything for me. Jen, do you have anything you want to plug or anywhere you want to direct people?
No, but just to say, TB, thanks to the TB fighters, probably won't be the deadliest disease anymore. But I can for sure say it won't be the loneliest anymore either because of the amazing solidarity you all provide.
Well, we can make anything fun. Maybe not having the TV, but fighting the TV. Um, so on that note, I think that's everything from our side. So as they say in our hometown, don't forget to be awesome.